What if one mistake could save your life and change everything you thought you knew about trust? Rosa Martinez had been working double shifts at Vinny's diner for 3 months straight, her feet aching, her mind foggy from exhaustion. She was 58 years old and shouldn't have been working this hard, but medical bills don't pay themselves. That Thursday evening, the place was packed as usual, steam rising from plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the jukebox playing Sinatra in the corner. Table 7 had been occupied by a quiet man in an expensive suit for over an hour, and Rosa was so tired she could barely see straight. When she pulled the check from her apron pocket and placed it face down on his table, she didn't notice she'd grabbed the wrong slip of paper. She didn't know that small mistake would unravel a web of betrayal worth millions, or that the man sitting there was Vincent Castellano, and people didn't usually make mistakes around him and live to tell about it. Where are you watching from tonight? Rosa had moved to Philadelphia from San Juan 30 years ago with dreams bigger than the small suitcase she'd carried. Those dreams had shifted over time, as dreams do, bending and reshaping themselves into something more practical. She'd raised 2 children working in diners just like this one, watched them graduate, helped them through their own struggles. Now she was alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and the medical bills from her daughter Maria's cancer treatment last year still arrived like clockwork every month. The insurance had covered some of it, but not nearly enough. Never enough. Vinny's diner sat on the corner of Morrison and 5th, the kind of place where regulars knew each other's orders by heart, and strangers were welcomed with fresh coffee and a smile. Rosa had worked there for 15 years, long enough that her hands knew the rhythm of carrying 3 plates at once, long enough that she could spot trouble walking through the door. Vincent Castellano wasn't trouble in the obvious way, not loud or aggressive or drunk. He was trouble in the quiet way, the kind that made the air feel heavier when he entered a room. He'd started coming in about 6 weeks ago, always alone, always ordering the same thing, ribeye steak. Medium rare, black coffee, no dessert. He was polite, even kind, leaving generous tips that Rosa tucked away gratefully. She'd noticed the expensive watch, the tailored suits, the way other men who came in would nod respectfully and keep their distance. She wasn't naive. She knew what Philadelphia's old neighborhoods were like, knew the stories, but she also knew that in her line of work, you treated everyone with dignity and minded your own business. That particular Thursday had been brutal from the start. The morning cook had called in sick, the dishwasher had quit without notice, and Rosa had been covering for Jenny, the younger waitress whose babysitter had canceled. By 6 in the evening, Rosa's lower back was screaming and her vision was starting to blur from fatigue. She'd served Mr. Castellano his usual ribeye around 7, and he'd eaten slowly, methodically, checking his phone occasionally but mostly just sitting in quiet observation. What Rosa didn't know was that Vincent Castellano was at a crossroads. For 40 years he'd built an empire in this city, not through violence, though there had been that too, but through careful relationships and loyalty. He'd always prided himself on knowing who to trust. Lately, though, money had been disappearing. Not small amounts, but hundreds of thousands of dollars skimmed from operations over the past year. He'd narrowed it down to someone in his inner circle, maybe more than one person, but he couldn't figure out who. It ate at him worse than any rival ever had. Betrayal from strangers was business. Betrayal from family was poison. When Rosa finally approached his table near closing time, she was running on autopilot. Her apron pockets were stuffed with order slips, receipts, pen caps, and the small notepad where she kept track of her own bills. She'd been writing down payment amounts during her break, trying to figure out which creditors to pay first this month. She reached into her pocket without looking, and pulled out what she thought was Mr. Castellano's check. She placed it face down on the table with a tired smile. "Whenever you're ready, sir. No rush." Vincent nodded, that small gesture of acknowledgement he always gave. Rosa turned away, already thinking about the bus ride home, about whether she had enough energy to heat up leftover soup, or if she'd just fall straight into bed. She didn't see Vincent flip over the paper, didn't see his expression change from neutral to stone cold in half a second, didn't see his hand freeze halfway to his wallet. Because what Vincent was looking at wasn't a restaurant bill. It was a handwritten list in Rosa's neat cursive. Tommy, 347 by the 20th. Dr. Chen, $892 by month end. Marco, $580 this week. Polly, wanting $200 next month. 4 names, 4 amounts. 4 people Vincent had known for decades. Tommy Rossini, his accountant. Marco Del Vecchio, his driver. Paulie Santoro, his right-hand man for 20 years. And Dr. Chen, well, that was the wild card. But Vincent knew a Dr. Chen who consulted for his legitimate businesses. His mind started racing, connecting dots that had been invisible before. The missing money, the careful way it had been skimmed. These 4 names, written in a waitress's handwriting, with dollar amounts and dates. Vincent's jaw tightened. This wasn't a restaurant bill. This was a ledger. She was the bookkeeper. She'd been tracking the payments right under his nose, hiding in plain sight as a tired woman serving meatloaf. He looked up at Rosa's back as she walked toward the kitchen, and his hand moved almost unconsciously toward his phone. Vincent Castellano had survived 4 decades in a dangerous world by trusting his instincts, and right now every instinct was screaming that he'd finally found his answer. The waitress, of course. Who notices waitresses? Who pays attention to tired women in diners? She was perfect cover, and these 4 men, his trusted men, had been making payments to her, probably using her to launder the money or hold it. The amounts lined up almost perfectly with the timeline of when money had started disappearing. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the worn linoleum. Across the diner, Rosa was wiping down the counter, her movements slow and practiced. Vincent walked toward her, the slip of paper in his hand. 2 other men in the diner, men who worked for him though they pretended to be regular customers, noticed the change in his demeanor and tensed. "Excuse me," Vincent said quietly when he reached the counter. Rosa turned, her kind eyes showing exhaustion but also that automatic waitress smile. "Yes, sir? Something wrong with your meal?" He placed the paper on the counter between them, face up. "You gave me the wrong bill." Rosa looked down and her face went pale. Not with guilt, Vincent noticed, but with pure embarrassment. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I've been so tired, I must have grabbed, that's my personal..." She reached for it quickly, fumbling in her apron for the actual check. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Castellano. Here's your real bill. That's just my own notes. I didn't mean to." But Vincent's hand came down gently on top of the paper, stopping her from taking it. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath. "Your own notes. With these names and these amounts." Rosa's embarrassment shifted into confusion. "Yes, sir. It's just my bills, what I owe. I write them down to keep track because there's so many, and I get confused." "You owe Tommy?" Vincent interrupted. "I owe everyone," Rosa said, and there was such weariness in her voice that it almost sounded like a joke. "Tommy's my landlord. He's been patient about the rent, but I'm 3 months behind. Marco owns the laundromat downstairs, and I owe him for all the times he let me wash my uniforms on credit. Paulie runs the corner bodega, and he's been letting me buy groceries on a tab because..." Her voice cracked slightly. "Because last year my daughter had cancer, and the bills just never stopped coming, and Dr. Chen was her oncologist, and even with the payment plan there's still..." She stopped, pressing her fingers against her eyes. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear all this. Please, I'll get your real check." Vincent stood there, completely still. Tommy Rossini wasn't just his accountant. Tommy also owned 3 apartment buildings in the neighborhood, legitimate rental properties. Marco Del Vecchio did drive for him, but his family had owned the laundromat for 40 years. Paulie Santoro, his right-hand man, had inherited his father's bodega and kept it running as a community service more than a business. And Dr. Chen was exactly who she said, an oncologist at Jefferson Hospital. This wasn't a ledger of betrayal. This was a list of debts from a woman trying to survive. He'd been so deep in his own paranoia, so consumed by the hunt for traitors, that he'd almost made a terrible mistake. "Your daughter," Vincent said slowly, and his voice had changed. Rosa didn't notice because she was too embarrassed, too focused on finding the actual check in her apron, but the men watching from across the diner noticed. They'd heard that tone before. It was the tone Vincent used when something had touched the part of him that still remembered being human. "She's all right now?" Rosa's hand stilled. She looked up at him, and he saw tears balanced on the edge of her eyes. "She's in remission. 6 months now. We're hopeful, but the bills from treatment..." They're crushing me. I picked up extra shifts. I've been working every day for months, but it's never enough. I'm falling further behind. She found the actual check and placed it on the counter. I'm sorry I gave you my personal paper. It won't happen again. Vincent looked at this woman, really looked at her. 58 years old, and working herself to exhaustion to pay for her daughter's life. Humble, dignified. Exactly the kind of person his own mother had been before she'd passed. Working herself to death in a different diner across town 50 years ago. If this moment touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Vincent picked up both pieces of paper, the real bill and Rosa's list. He pulled out his wallet and placed $300 on the counter, more than triple what his meal cost. Then he folded Rosa's list carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Keep the change, he said, and Rosa, you go home and get some rest. You look like you're about to fall over. Rosa stared at the money, her mouth opening and closing. Sir, I can't accept. This is too much. Yes, you can, Vincent said firmly, but not unkindly. Then he walked toward the door. But as he stepped out into the cool night air, Vincent's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his head of security, marked urgent. We found it. Security footage from the warehouse. You need to see this tonight. Vincent looked back through the diner window at Rosa, who was still standing at the counter holding the money like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Then he looked down at the list in his pocket. 4 names, his men. If they'd been kind to this woman, letting her run up tabs, being patient with her, maybe they weren't the traitors he'd thought, or maybe the real betrayal was something else entirely. Something he hadn't seen yet, because he'd been looking in the wrong direction. He got into his car, and the driver who wasn't Marco tonight, who was someone Vincent didn't entirely trust, pulled away from the curb. Vincent made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd look into every single name on Rosa's list, but not as suspects, as windows into what was really happening in his organization. Sometimes the truth isn't in what people steal. Sometimes it's in what they give away. The security footage that night showed Vincent something he'd never expected to see. In the warehouse where they stored legitimate imports, electronics and textiles, there was his nephew, Danny, 26 years old, Vincent's sister's boy. The kid Vincent had mentored since he was 15. Danny had been given a supervisor position 6 months ago, and in the grainy black and white footage, Vincent watched Danny loading boxes into an unmarked van at 2 a.m, pulling inventory that was never recorded, shipments that never appeared on any manifest. Vincent sat in his office above the social club until dawn, watching the footage over and over. The missing money wasn't being skimmed by his trusted men. It was being stolen by his family. And worse, when he pulled the financial records, he found something that made his stomach turn. Danny wasn't working alone. The doctored paperwork had signatures, approvals from someone with high-level access. Vincent spent the rest of the night tracing the trail, and each discovery felt like a knife turning deeper. By the time the sun came up Friday morning, Vincent had the full picture. Danny had been stealing for over a year, nearly $2 million in total, and he'd convinced 3 young guys in the organization to help him, kids who didn't know any better, who thought they were doing regular work. But the real poison was who'd been enabling it from above. Vincent's own cousin, Angelo, who'd been the operations manager for 15 years. Angelo had been covering Danny's tracks, falsifying records, redirecting suspicion. Family, protecting family, but at the expense of everything Vincent had built. The betrayal hollowed him out in a way that violence never had. Vincent had lost friends to bullets and prison and time, but this was different. This was being betrayed by his own blood, by the nephew he'd taught to drive, by the cousin who'd sat at his dinner table every Sunday for decades. He thought about Rosa again, about her daughter's cancer, about the way she'd said, "I owe everyone," like it was just a fact of her existence. She'd been buried under debt trying to save her child's life, working honest double shifts until her body gave out. Meanwhile, his own family had been stealing millions and lying to his face. Vincent called a meeting for Friday evening. Just the inner circle. Tommy, Marco, Paulie, and his consigliere, Frank Moretti. They gathered in the back room of the social club, and Vincent watched their faces as they entered. These were the men whose names had been on Rosa's list, men he'd almost suspected. Tommy with his careful accounting, always precise. Marco with his quiet loyalty, never asking questions. Polly, his right hand, who'd saved Vincent's life twice over the years. "I found who's been stealing," Vincent said without preamble. He laid out the evidence. The warehouse footage, the financial trail, the scale of the betrayal. He watched their faces shift from confusion to shock to anger. These men, who he'd almost doubted, were as betrayed as he was. "Danny," Polly said, and his voice was thick with disbelief. "Your sister's boy? And Angelo covered for him?" "Family," Tommy said bitterly. "Always family that cuts the deepest." They discussed what came next, and the old Vincent would have handled it the old way, quick and final. But something had shifted in him. Maybe it was Rosa's list in his pocket. A reminder that the world was full of people just trying to survive. People who made mistakes out of exhaustion rather than malice. Or maybe it was seeing his nephew's face on that footage, young and stupid and thinking he was cleverer than he was. "I want to talk to him first," Vincent said. "Before anything else, I want to understand why." The men exchanged glances. Frank spoke carefully. "Vincent, there's protocol for this. You've always said family doesn't excuse." "I know what I've always said," Vincent interrupted. "But I'm tired, Frank. I'm 63 years old and I'm tired of the old ways." He pulled out Rosa's list and set it on the table. "Last night I almost made a terrible mistake because I was so deep in paranoia I couldn't see straight. This list isn't what I thought it was. It's a waitress's debt payments. I almost hurt someone who didn't deserve it because I was looking for enemies everywhere." He stood up, feeling every one of his 63 years in his bones. "I need to know if Danny can be saved or if he's already gone. And I need to know why Angelo, after everything we've been through, would do this. Have you ever faced something like this? When family disappointed you in ways you never imagined? Let us know in the comments." Vincent left the meeting and drove across town to the one place he thought might give him clarity. He drove to Vinny's diner. Rosa was working the lunch shift when Vincent walked in Friday afternoon. She looked surprised to see him, and a little nervous, probably worried she'd done something else wrong. He slid into a booth near the back, and she approached cautiously, coffee pot in hand. "Mr. Castellano. Back so soon? I need to ask you something," Vincent said. "About the people on your list. The ones you owe money to." Rosa's face flushed again. "Sir, please, you don't need to worry about my problems. They're good men." He interrupted. "Tommy, Marco, Polly, they've treated you fairly?" Rosa looked confused but nodded slowly. "More than fairly. Tommy could have evicted me months ago when I couldn't pay rent, but he said times are hard for everyone, and I could catch up when my daughter got better. Marco's done my laundry for free more times than I can count. Says his machines need running anyway. And Polly, he stocks this special tea his wife drinks. Sends it home with me because he says it helped when his wife was going through treatment." Her eyes got distant and warm. "They're just good people. Salt of the earth, you know? People who remember where they came from." Vincent felt something loosen in his chest. His instincts about these men had been right all along. They hadn't betrayed him. They'd been being human, showing kindness to someone who needed it. The betrayal had come from exactly where he'd refused to look, his own family. "Why do you do it?" Vincent asked suddenly. "Work yourself to death like this? Your daughter's in remission. You could declare bankruptcy, start over." Rosa set down the coffee pot and slid into the booth across from him, too tired to maintain professional distance. "Because I'm 58 years old, Mr. Castellano, and my daughter is 29. When she got sick, the doctors said it was aggressive, said we should prepare for the worst. But I prayed to every saint I know, and I promised that if she lived, I'd pay every penny we owed, no matter how long it took. Because those doctors saved her life. Dr. Chen worked miracles, and Tommy, Marco, Polly, all these people in this neighborhood, they helped us survive when we had nothing." Her voice cracked. "Debt isn't just money. It's people who chose to believe in you when they didn't have to. I'll pay them back because that's what honor is. That's what family is. Even when they're not blood." Vincent sat there absorbing her words. Honor. Family. Not blood, but choice. Something he'd believed in once, before the business had turned it all into something colder, harder. Rosa had just defined what he'd spent 40 years trying to build, explained it better than he ever could. He made his decision then. That evening, Vincent confronted Danny in the warehouse. His nephew started with denials, then excuses, then finally angry accusations. "You're so rich, Uncle Vincent. What's a little bit to me? I'm family. I deserve a piece." "You had a piece," Vincent said quietly. "You had a job, respect, a future. You chose to steal instead, and Angelo, when confronted, was worse. Bitter, resentful, claiming Vincent had always played favorites, had always loved Danny more than his own cousin. The betrayal was complete, and it was ugly, but Vincent didn't do things the old way. He called the meeting with all the senior people, including Tommy, Marco, and Polly. He laid out the evidence publicly, stripped Danny and Angelo of their positions, and banished them from the organization and the family. No violence, no permanent solutions, just excommunication. They'd have to build their own lives somewhere else, without his name or protection. It was the hardest mercy Vincent had ever given. After the meeting, Vincent went back to his office and pulled out Rosa's list again. He called Tommy first. That waitress at Vinny's, Rosa Martinez. "What's she owe you?" "About 1,000 now with late fees. But Vincent, she's good for it eventually. I'm not worried. She's paid in full as of tomorrow. Send me the total." He called Marco next, then Polly, then finally called Jefferson Hospital about Dr. Chen's bills. By the end of the night, he'd arranged to pay every debt on Rosa's list, anonymously through a community fund he set up. She'd never know it was him. She'd just wake up one day and find her balances cleared, think it was some charity program or administrative error. It cost him less than what Danny had stolen in a single month. If you've been enjoying this story and want to hear more like it, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. On Sunday, Vincent went back to Vinny's diner one last time. Rosa served him his usual ribeye, and he left a tip big enough to cover her rent for 6 months. When she tried to refuse, he simply said, "Sometimes people are kind to us when we need it most. Pass it on when you can." As he left, he felt lighter than he had in years. The organization would survive. The real family, the one built on choice and honor rather than blood and obligation, was stronger than ever. And somewhere out there, a tired waitress would finally get to rest. 3 months later, Rosa Martinez sat in the small community garden behind her apartment building, watching the sun set over Philadelphia. Her daughter Maria sat beside her, stronger now, color back in her cheeks, talking about going back to school to finish her nursing degree. The medical bills had been mysteriously forgiven, some mix-up with a charity fund Rosa had never heard of, and her other debts had vanished the same way. When she'd asked Tommy about the rent, he'd just shrugged and said a benefactor had covered it. Wouldn't say who. Marco and Polly had said the same thing. Rosa suspected she knew who, though. That man in the expensive suit who'd started coming to the diner, who'd been there the night everything changed. He still came in sometimes, always polite, always leaving generous tips. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something softer. He'd nod at her, and she'd nod back, and nothing more needed to be said. Some kindnesses are too big for thank yous. Some moments of grace change lives in ways that words can't hold. She'd picked up fewer shifts now, taking time to actually live, to garden and cook proper meals, and sit with Maria watching old movies. She'd started paying it forward like Mr. Castellano had suggested, leaving extra-large tips when she went out to eat, helping the new young waitress at Vinny's who reminded Rosa of herself 30 years ago. Kindness flowed like water when you let it, filling all the empty spaces. Vincent Castellano had made his own changes. The organization ran differently now, less about fear and more about actual family, the kind you choose. Tommy had been promoted to a role where his fairness and precision could guide younger members. Marco trained new drivers but also taught them respect and discretion. Polly had become Vincent's true right hand, not just in business, but in maintaining the kind of honor that mattered. They'd lost some of the younger guys who only respected the old ways, but the ones who stayed were better for it. Vincent had also started a fund, legitimate and registered, that helped families with medical debt in the neighborhood. He didn't advertise his involvement, but word got around anyway. People knew. The neighborhood remembered. And in remembering, something had shifted. The old fear had transformed into something else. Not quite love, but respect mixed with gratitude. Vincent found he preferred it. He'd called his sister eventually, after the anger had cooled. Danny was in Florida now, working construction, struggling but alive. Angelo had disappeared into Atlantic City. Vincent had made peace with their choices, even if he couldn't forgive them yet. Family was complicated, always had been. Blood didn't guarantee loyalty, but it didn't have to guarantee hatred either. There was space between for something more measured, more mature. On a cool October evening, Vincent returned to Vinny's diner one more time. Rosa was training that new girl, patient and kind, showing her how to carry 3 plates at once, how to remember orders without writing them down, how to treat every customer like they mattered. When Rosa saw Vincent, she smiled that genuine smile and pointed him to his usual booth. She brought him his coffee without asking, and as she set it down, she paused. "Mr. Castellano, I never got to properly thank you." "For what?" Vincent said, though they both knew. "For reminding me that one mistake doesn't define us. That exhaustion and confusion aren't the same as malice. You could have been angry that night when I gave you the wrong bill, but you weren't. You saw me. Really saw me." She touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture both familiar and respectful. That's rare in this world. Vincent looked up at her. This woman who'd accidentally saved him from his own worst instincts, who'd shown him what real honor looked like. "You remind me of my mother," he said quietly. "She worked in a place like this, worked herself to exhaustion for her family. I wish I'd understood then what I understand now." "She'd be proud of you," Rosa said simply. "I can tell. Maybe she would have been. Maybe not." But Vincent chose to believe it. Chose to think that somewhere his mother was watching and nodding approval, glad that her son had finally learned what she'd tried to teach him all those years ago. That strength isn't just about power. It's about knowing when to show mercy. That family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them. That honor is keeping your promises, even when it costs you everything. Rosa went back to training the new girl, and Vincent sipped his coffee and watched the diner fill up with evening customers. People coming home from work, families gathering for Friday dinner, the whole beautiful mess of neighborhood life continuing around him. The jukebox played Sinatra, the same song that had been playing the night Rosa had handed him that wrong bill, and Vincent felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Simple, uncomplicated peace. When he left that evening, he placed a folded piece of paper under his coffee cup along with his payment. Rosa would find it later after he'd gone. It was her original list, the one she'd accidentally given him 3 months ago, with every name crossed out and beside each one. A single word written in Vincent's careful script. Paid. At the bottom, he'd written, "Debts settled. Start fresh. You've earned it." If you enjoyed this story, and it touched your heart, please remember to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts about kindness and second chances, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories about the moments that change us. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for remembering that we're all just people trying our best, sometimes making mistakes, sometimes being the miracle someone else needs. Take care of each other out there. The world needs more roses, and maybe, just maybe, more people willing to change like Vincent did. Until next time, friends.